Hey y'all, once again, Aubrey Lauren here. I figured I'd try something new and have a webcam, so I hope you can see me down at the teeny tiny part of the screen, so we'll see, but I hope so. So let's get started. California missions. I taught California history a few months back, so I figured I'd just recycle one of my old PowerPoints, and I updated it a little bit to be a little longer, and so let's get started. So the California missions, you can't talk about the missions without talking about the Spanish territory and how it was started by Spain. So what I have here is a map of what was considered the New World at the time. And so this line right here is the line that was drawn by the Pope. Portugal wanted to colonize the New World as well as Spain. And Portugal had already had a couple of colonies in Africa and some other colonies actually in Europe. So, and at the time, they didn't know how big the New World was going to be. And so the Pope drew a line right here saying everything to the east of this line belongs to Portugal and everything on the east side, on the west side, I'm sorry, of that belongs to Spain. And so as you can see, by this map, Spain kind of got the bigger end of the deal. Excuse me. So California, of course, was a part of the New Spain territory. It was actually called Alta California. So right here, of course, we know this as Baja, so Baja California, and they referred to this as Alta California. And it was considered too far north to settle because the ocean right here, it runs in a clockwise current, and because the ocean current and the winds flow downward, it was actually more difficult to sail up because you had to sail against the winds, sail against the currents. So it took a lot of time and effort, and thus it took a lot of money. And so Spain didn't really pay too much attention to it until British and Russian, because of course you know the British colonized all of Canada, or the majority of Canada, and the Russians were in Alaska up here. So you had the Russians starting to come down a little bit and the British starting to come down. Thus, the Spanish were like, hey, wait, hold on. We claim this territory. It's ours. And the English and the Russians were like, well, you don't have any people here, so it's kind of fair game. So that prompted the Spanish to start a defensive expansion. So they needed to get people in Alta California to settle it, to further to solidify its claim to the area. My phone just went off, I'm sorry. So what they did, how they did that to I had a word and I just lost it. To settle their claims, they built missions. So these missions served two purposes. One, to settle Alta California, and two, to Christianize to Christianize and Hispanicize the natives. I like having my face here so that you can see when I mess up versus hearing me mess up my voice and think that I'm weird or something. So, excuse me. So we have right here, these are all 21 missions, as you can clearly see. And so they were started by Father Junipero Serra and Captain Portola. The missions were meant to secure Spain's territory, and they Christianized and Hispanicized the native peoples. And by doing so, that means that even though there were no Spaniards, no Mexicans who wanted to go into California to live there because there was nothing there, they decided to use this mission system. So thereby taking the native populations, teaching them Spanish, teaching them European ways of living, basically making them Spanish citizens, therefore settling the state of California. Does that make sense? So instead of bringing Spaniards up, they created Spaniards out of the Indians. So forts and churches. So of course we all know the missions were churches, but they were also forts, the presidios. They were near the missions, and some of them were attached to the missions. And they were evenly spaced for easy access to both the church and the mission. I'm sorry, that was the same thing. To the church and to the fort. They protected the missions against Indian revolts, but they also held the Indians that were in the mission inside the mission, so they couldn't escape. Or they couldn't escape easy, I guess I should say. El Camino Real was the road that they built the missions on. So it starts down in like San Diego, which was the furthest south mission, and then it goes all the way up to San. I actually cannot read that at the moment. It goes all the way up, and this right here, we currently today know it as the 101 freeway. How cool is that? US 101 was started by El Camino Real, which all of the missions are pretty much like exits on the freeway, which is totally awesome. So they used this to transport mail. Of course, all they had was snail mail back then. So they had all the mail that they had to transport. So if you were way the heck up here in San Francisco and you had to send a letter to the Pope or to the King of Spain, you had to send it all the way down this road to go to Mexico City and then go across the Atlantic to Spain. So email is nice. So you have soldiers. Ow! Ashley, this is gonna go on YouTube!
Are you hungry?
No, I ate.
Okay.
You're not wearing green.
Okay. I had to switch rooms because my family just came in and my sister pinched me for not wearing green for St. Patrick's Day. Anyways, so there's some humor for you. That's realistically my family. So soldiers worked at the missions. Yes, the padres ran the mission, but the soldiers protected the mission, and they also lived on the missions as well. They carried the mail. They wasn't an easy life. Sometimes they didn't get paid because the money payments, they were paid by the king technically. So they had to wait for the money to go from Spain to Mexico City to be sent up the Camino Real to them to be paid. So they would sometimes go for years without being paid. They captured the Indians and brought them into the mission to be Christianized. I'll lower this a little bit. I'm actually on a swivel chair, so that's why I'm swaying. There was quite often a lack of food, a lack of gunpowder, and a lack of money. Excuse me. Like I said, they didn't get paid often, so it was not an easy life for the soldiers. Hey, there it goes. Really should have locked that door because my dad came in and I tried to pause it right away. So I'm sorry for all these interruptions. Hopefully this will make for a funny video. Mission layout. They were normally built like a square because the mission was basically a village. So by this square or rectangular, more likely, design, you had accommodations for the church, the storages, the living quarters, the kitchens, the gardens. Here are gardens that they have outside as well. Most missions had like one way in and one way out, or limited ways in, because of course they want the church to be public, because they want excuse me, they want the Indians to attend the church services, so of course it was near an Indian village. They taught them how to make a well and how to divert the water for irrigation and stuff like that, so it was pretty much like its own village. And this was meant, again, to Christianize and Hispanicize these natives. So, in doing so, they had all of these... Hi, Mom.
Hi.
This is going to be an interesting video. They had all of these... I'm recording right now.
Oh.
Okay. I hope this video turns out to be quite humorous. Okay, so once again, church is public. They want the Indians to come to the church services, which they required the Indians that were all living in the church, living in the mission to attend their church services, and they had several services throughout the entire day. And they worked with the Indians on growing stuff, growing crops, and how the Hispanics grow their crops and how they do things. They wanted to Hispanicize them. So by Hispanicizing them, making them pseudo-Spanish citizens to populate California. Next. There it goes. Mission daily life. I didn't realize this was the same picture until now. But... oh well. So mission life was busy and regimented, so they prayed an awful lot, of course, being Roman Catholic, and they The mission bells rang for everything. So the bell rang, it's time to wake up. The bell rang, it's time to pray. The bell rang, it's time for church service. The bell rang, it's time to eat. Bell rang, it's time to go to church. Bell rang, it's time to go to work. Bell rang, it's time to eat. So it was very regimented. They didn't have any time off. And if they had time off, they should be praying. That's how strict it was for these poor Indians who didn't know the system. So being introduced to the system was very difficult for them. The men typically worked in the fields, and the women were taught how to make clothes and how to cook. So usually they had a men's quarters and a women's quarters. They separated them. So in the village where they could be side by side and it didn't matter to them, now all of a sudden they enter the missions and they had to be separated, males and females, and it was very, very, very strict. And they didn't find it at all easy to live with, and of course the padres thought that this is the best thing for them, this is how you do it, because they're trying to teach them the European ways of life by forcing it onto them effectively. We know this now, but they didn't then. The end of the mission system. So, the mission system ended with Mexican independence. And after Mexican independence, Mexico secularized the missions, meaning they have served their purpose, they have secured the territory of Alta California for Mexico, so therefore Alta California now belongs to Mexico, and now since they have people there, they've served their purpose. There's no need to have them. Some of them became parish churches, but quite often a lot were abandoned, as you can see by this painting and this actual photo. A lot of the Indians dispersed, which, first chance they got, go back to where normal is, done with this crazy church crud. I mean, think about it this way. If you were an Indian and you were submersed in this culture forcibly, you probably wouldn't like it. So it would make sense to just run back to your sense of normalcy. So a lot of these lands tended to become ranchos. Mexico gave land grants called ranchos, which were intended to raise cattle and sheep. And so you raised the horses to sell horses, you broke horses or found wild horses and broke them and tamed them and domesticated them to be normal riding horses. And you would raise cattle, goats, sheep, cows, not oxen, bulls? Bulls? Yeah, bulls. And I couldn't think of that word. And these animals were used a lot for their meat, their hide. The fat of the animal is actually called the tallow, which is used to make candles and soaps, which is very interesting. So primitive soaps were made from animal fat. You clean yourself with animal fat. That sounds pretty nasty now, but that's true. That's what it was. And the wax in the candle was often made from tallow. So wax from the candle is normally fat. They were the primary exports of California until, mid-19th century. I apologize if I'm talking really fast. I'm trying to get this done as fast as possible because I am on a timer and I have to finish this video before 15 minutes. So the sheep obviously produce wool. You've got really good meats and leather, and I think that's all to be said about that. Last slide! Mexican California. Mexican independence from Spain marked the beginning of Mexican rule in California, like I said previously. Mexico included Baja California and Alta California. Eventually this became known to be just California after the gold rush. Mexico included in its territory but could not rule it directly. So, of course, I don't know where Mexico City is. I think that's it right there. So, of course, Mexico City is where all of the instruction came from. And it was really difficult because this is all desert and Indian territory. People didn't really want to travel up there. So it was very difficult to have an active control of any of the Californias. So it was not recognized as an official state of Mexico, but it remained a territory of Mexico until the gold rush, when all the white people came in and said, gold! And basically kicked everybody out, fled in vast numbers, and then we said, we got enough white people here, let's make it a state of the United States! And they did, because California cheated and totally skipped some of the steps to becoming a state. That's California history, that's the mission system, and I hope you enjoyed all my interruptions. See you later.